There are some people in this world who walk into a room and everyone notices them. They have that kind of energy. They speak, and people listen. They smile, and people smile back. Then there are people like Tobias. The kind of person you could sit next to for an entire year and still forget his name. The kind of person who blends into walls, into crowds, into silence. And maybe that was exactly what he wanted, or maybe it was the only thing he knew how to do. Tobias was 17 years old when his life changed in ways he never saw coming. But before we get to that moment, the moment that left an entire classroom speechless, we need to understand who he was. We need to understand the boy who sat in the last row, wore the same gray hoodie almost every day, and never once raised his hand to answer a question. He had transferred to Westbrook High in the middle of the school year. That alone was enough to make things hard. Kids had already formed their groups by then. Friendships were locked in. Inside jokes had been made. And here came this new kid, walking through the front doors in November, when everyone else had already figured out where they belonged. But it was not just bad timing that made things difficult for Tobias. It was everything else too. His family had lost their home 3 months before the transfer. His father had worked at a manufacturing plant for almost 15 years. And when the company shut down and moved overseas, there was no warning. One Friday, he had a job. By Monday, he did not. The bills kept coming though. The rent, the electricity, the car payments. Within weeks, the notices started arriving. Within 2 months, they were packing whatever they could fit into garbage bags and moving into his grandmother's apartment on the other side of town. It was a small place. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and now 5 people were living in it. Tobias shared a room with his younger brother, sleeping on an air mattress that slowly deflated every night. By morning, he would wake up with his back pressed against the cold floor. He never told anyone at school about this. He never told anyone about the nights he heard his parents whispering in the kitchen, trying to figure out how to make $20 stretch for a week of groceries. He never told anyone about the shame he felt wearing the same clothes, because most of his things were still in storage, and there was no money to get them out. So he stayed quiet. He kept his head down. And every single day, he walked into Westbrook High hoping no one would notice him. But kids notice everything. They noticed his old shoes. They noticed the way his jeans were slightly too short, because he had grown over the summer and there was no money for new ones. They noticed that he never bought lunch, that he sat alone at a table near the back of the cafeteria with nothing in front of him, pretending to scroll through a phone that barely worked anymore. And worst of all, they noticed his stutter. Tobias had struggled with speaking for as long as he could remember. When he was younger, it was not so bad. His words would trip over each other sometimes. But people were patient. Kids were kind, at least back then. But as he got older, the stutter became worse. Stress made it worse. Anxiety made it worse. And moving to a new school in the middle of the year, with no friends, no confidence, and no idea how to fit in, made it unbearable. Every time a teacher called on him, his throat would tighten. The words would get stuck somewhere between his brain and his mouth, piling up like cars in a traffic jam. He could see the answer clearly in his mind. He knew exactly what he wanted to say, but getting it out was a battle he lost more often than he won. The first time it happened at Westbrook, the class went silent. Not in a kind way, in a waiting way. 30 pairs of eyes locked on him as he struggled to say a single sentence. Someone in the back laughed, then someone else. And even though the teacher told them to stop, Tobias saw the smirks. He saw the sideways glances. He heard the whispers that followed him into the hallway after class. After that day, he made a decision. He would never speak in class again unless he absolutely had to. He would stay invisible. He would survive. And for a while, that plan worked. He moved through his days like a ghost. He arrived early, left late, and spent most of his free time in the library, where no one asked him questions, and no one expected him to talk. The librarian, an older woman with kind eyes and a soft voice, was one of the only people at school who ever smiled at him. She never asked why he was always alone. She just let him sit in the corner, reading books or staring out the window, and sometimes she would leave a granola bar on the table near him without saying a word. Those small moments kept him going. But even ghosts get seen eventually. There was a group of boys who seemed to find joy in making others feel small. They were not the loudest kids in school, and they were not the most popular, but they had a talent for finding the weakest person in any room and pressing on that weakness until something broke. They found Tobias in his second month at Westbrook. It started with small things. A comment about his shoes. A mocking stutter when he walked past. A shove in the hallway that could be passed off as an accident. Tobias ignored it all. He had learned a long time ago that reacting only made things worse. So he swallowed the humiliation, kept his eyes on the floor, and kept moving. But silence does not always protect you. Sometimes, it just makes people push harder. What none of them knew, what no one at Westbrook High could have possibly guessed, was that Tobias carried something inside him. A gift. A secret. Something that had been with him since he was 6 years old and sat down at a piano for the first time. That gift was about to change everything, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. Because before the moment that silenced an entire room, before the tears and the standing ovation and the truth that no one saw coming, there was one more thing that had to happen. Tobias had to decide that he was done being invisible. And that decision came on a random Tuesday afternoon, when his English teacher announced an assignment that made his heart stop, a talent showcase. In front of the entire class. No exceptions. Tobias sat in his chair, staring at the board, his hands trembling under the desk. Around him, students were already buzzing with excitement, calling out ideas, laughing with their friends, and for the first time in months, Tobias felt something other than fear. He felt a tiny spark of something that had been buried for a very long time. He felt hope. The classroom was loud that Tuesday afternoon. Everyone was talking over each other, throwing out ideas, already planning what they would do for the talent showcase. Some wanted to sing. Some wanted to dance. One kid said he could solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute, and another said she could do a comedy routine that would have everyone rolling on the floor. But Tobias heard none of it. His mind was somewhere else entirely. It was stuck on a memory. A memory of sitting at a piano bench when he was just 6 years old, his feet dangling above the floor because he was too small to reach the pedals. His mother had been sitting next to him that day, guiding his tiny fingers across the keys, showing him which notes to press and when. That was the first time he ever made music. And from that moment on, something inside him changed. The piano became his escape. It became the one place where his stutter did not matter. When he played, he did not have to speak. He did not have to explain himself. He did not have to fight to get words out of his mouth. The music said everything for him, and it said it beautifully. His mother had been a pianist herself. A really good one. She had studied music in college and even performed at a few concerts before life got busy and responsibilities took over. But she never stopped playing, and she made sure Tobias never stopped either. Every evening after dinner, they would sit together at the old upright piano in their living room. She would teach him new pieces, challenge him with harder songs, and clap with pride every time he got something right. Those were some of the happiest memories of his life. But then everything fell apart. 2 years before Tobias transferred to Westbrook, his mother got sick. It started with headaches that would not go away. Then came the dizzy spells. Then the diagnosis that turned their whole world upside down. A brain tumor. Inoperable. The doctors gave her 6 months. She held on for 8. Tobias was 15 when she passed. He did not play piano for almost a year after that. He could not even look at one without feeling like his chest was caving in. The music that had once brought him so much joy now only reminded him of what he had lost. But grief has a strange way of working through people. Slowly, without him even realizing it, Tobias found himself drawn back to the keys. At first, it was just a few notes here and there, then a simple melody. Then, one night, he sat down and played one of the pieces his mother had taught him. And he cried so hard, he could barely see the keys in front of him. That night, something shifted. The piano was no longer a source of pain. It became a way to feel close to her again. When he played, He could almost hear her voice. He could almost feel her sitting beside him, nodding along, smiling that warm smile that made everything feel okay. After his family lost their home and moved into his grandmother's apartment, there was no room for the piano. They had to sell it just to help cover bills. Tobias had stood in the driveway and watched a stranger load it into a truck, and it felt like losing his mother all over again. But he did not stop playing. 3 blocks away from his grandmother's apartment, there was a small church. It was old and quiet, and most evenings, it sat empty. But inside, tucked in a corner near the back, there was a piano. It was not fancy. Some of the keys stuck, and the sound was a little dull. But it was a piano. And the pastor, a kind man who never asked too many questions, told Tobias he was welcome to come and play whenever he wanted. So that is what he did. Every single night, after finishing his homework and helping his brother get ready for bed, Tobias would slip out of the apartment and walk to that church. He would sit at that old piano and play for hours, teaching himself new pieces, pushing himself harder and harder. He played Beethoven. He played Chopin. He played pieces that most professional pianists spent years trying to master, and he never told a single soul. Now, sitting in that classroom at Westbrook High, listening to his classmates shout out their talent ideas, Tobias felt something stir inside him, a question he had been avoiding for a long time. What if he signed up? The thought terrified him. He had spent months trying to be invisible. He had built walls around himself so high that no one could see in. The idea of standing in front of the whole class, of being watched, of being judged, made his hands go cold and his heart race. But there was another feeling too. A quieter one. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was his chance. His chance to be seen. His chance to show everyone that he was more than the kid who stuttered, more than the kid in the old hoodie, more than the kid who sat alone and never said a word. His chance to honor his mother. Before he could talk himself out of it, Tobias raised his hand. The teacher looked surprised. She glanced at her list, then back at him. Yes? You want to sign up? Tobias nodded. His throat was already tightening, the familiar panic rising in his chest. But he forced the words out anyway. I want to play piano. For a second, there was silence. Then someone near the front let out a short laugh. Then another. And another. Within moments, half the class was snickering, whispering to each other, looking back at him with expressions that ranged from amusement to disbelief. Piano? One kid said loud enough for everyone to hear. Are you serious? Does he even know what a piano looks like? Another voice added. The laughter grew louder. Tobias felt his face burn. His hands were shaking under the desk, and every instinct in his body was screaming at him to take it back, to say he was joking, to disappear into the floor and never come back. But he did not. He sat there, staring straight ahead, and said nothing. He let them laugh. He let them whisper. And when the teacher finally quieted the class and wrote his name on the list, he felt something harden inside him, something that was not fear anymore. It was determination. The next few weeks were brutal. Word spread fast through the school that the quiet kid with the stutter had signed up to play piano at the talent showcase. People he had never even spoken to started making jokes about it. Someone taped a picture of a toy keyboard to his locker with a note that said, "Practice on this first." A group of kids would pretend to play invisible pianos whenever he walked by, laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. Tobias ignored all of it. Every cruel word, every mocking gesture, every sideways look, because every night, he walked to that little church, sat down at that old piano, and played until his fingers ached. He practiced the same piece over and over again, a piece so difficult that most people would never even attempt it. A piece his mother had once played for him when he was little, telling him that one day, when he was ready, she would teach it to him. She never got the chance. But Tobias was going to play it anyway, for her, for himself, for every person who had ever made him feel like he was nothing. The day of the showcase was coming, and Tobias was ready to show them all who he really was. The morning of the talent showcase, Tobias woke up before his alarm. He lay there on the deflated air mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to his younger brother breathe softly in the bed across the room. The apartment was still dark. The sun had not come up yet. But sleep was impossible now. Today was the day. He had thought about this moment for weeks. He had imagined it 1,000 different ways. Sometimes, in his mind, everything went perfectly. He walked onto that stage, sat down at the piano, and played like he had never played before. The music filled the room, and everyone went silent, and for once in his life, people saw him for who he really was. But other times, the imagination was not so kind. He saw himself freezing up, forgetting the notes, his fingers slipping on the keys while the whole class laughed and pointed, and recorded it on their phones so they could share it with everyone. In those versions, he walked off the stage in shame, and things got even worse than before. Tobias pushed those thoughts away and sat up slowly. He could not let fear win. Not today. He had come too far. He got dressed quietly, pulling on his cleanest shirt and the one pair of jeans that did not have holes in them. He looked at himself in the small bathroom mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. His eyes looked tired. His face looked thin. But somewhere behind all of that, there was something else. A flicker of something he had not seen in a long time. Courage. Or maybe just stubbornness. He was not sure which. His grandmother was already awake when he came into the kitchen. She was standing by the stove, making eggs, the way she did every morning. She looked up when she saw him and smiled. "Big day today," she said. Tobias nodded. He had not told her much about the showcase, just that he was going to perform something at school. She did not push for details. She never did, but she had a way of knowing when something mattered, and this morning, she set down a plate in front of him with extra toast and a glass of orange juice. "You're going to do great," she said softly. "I can feel it." Tobias wanted to believe her. He really did. The walk to school felt longer than usual. Every step seemed heavier. The air was cold, and his breath came out in little white clouds that disappeared as soon as they formed. He kept his hands buried in his pockets and his head down, the way he always did. But today, his mind was somewhere else. It was running through the piece he was about to play, note by note, measure by measure, trying to make sure he had not forgotten anything. He had practiced it so many times that his fingers knew the music by heart. But knowing something and performing it in front of people were two very different things. In the quiet of that little church, with no one watching, he could play perfectly. But on a stage, with dozens of eyes on him, with people waiting for him to fail, everything could fall apart in an instant. When he got to school, the hallways were buzzing with energy. The showcase was happening during the last 2 periods of the day, and everyone was talking about it. Some kids were nervous. Some were excited. A few were already practicing their routines in empty classrooms, singing into invisible microphones or running through dance moves one last time. Tobias walked past all of them without a word. He went straight to his locker, grabbed his books, and tried to make it through his morning classes without thinking too much about what was coming. It did not work. Every minute felt like an hour. Every class dragged on forever. He could not focus on anything the teachers were saying. His leg bounced under his desk. His hands would not stop fidgeting, and every time he looked at the clock, it seemed like the hands had barely moved at all. By lunchtime, his stomach was in knots. He did not eat. He just sat at his usual table in the back of the cafeteria, staring at nothing, trying to keep his breathing steady. A few kids walked by and made comments. One of them asked if he was ready to embarrass himself. Another pretended to play a piano in the air and laughed with his friends. Tobias said nothing. He just sat there, still and quiet, letting the noise wash over him like water. Then, finally, the announcement came over the loudspeaker. The showcase was about to begin. All students were asked to make their way to the auditorium. This was it. Tobias stood up slowly. His legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. But he forced himself to walk, one step at a time, down the hallway, through the double doors, into the auditorium, where rows and rows of seats were already filling up with students and teachers. The performers were told to sit in the front 2 rows. Tobias found a seat at the very end, as far from the others as he could get. He did not want to talk to anyone. He did not want to see their faces or hear their whispers. He just wanted to get through this. One by one, the acts began. A girl got up and sang a pop song. Her voice was good, and the crowd clapped along. A group of boys did a comedy skit that had everyone laughing. A dancer performed a routine that made people cheer. Each act seemed better than the last, and with every performance, Tobias felt his confidence shrinking. What was he thinking? These people were good. Really good. And here he was, the kid nobody believed in, about to sit down at a piano and try to prove them all wrong. His hands were sweating now. He wiped them on his jeans, but it did not help. His heart was pounding so hard, he could hear it in his ears. The room felt too hot. The lights felt too bright. Everything was spinning just a little, and he had to grip the armrest of his chair just to stay grounded. More acts came and went. A magic trick, a guitar solo, a spoken word poem. The crowd clapped and cheered for all of them. And then, finally, the teacher walked back to the microphone. Our last performer today is Tobias. He will be playing piano for us. There was a pause. Then a few giggles from somewhere in the middle of the auditorium. Tobias heard someone whisper, "This is going to be good." And he knew they did not mean it, in a kind way. He saw a few students pulling out their phones, holding them up, ready to record whatever disaster was about to happen. But he stood up anyway. His legs were shaking. His whole body was shaking. But he walked down the aisle toward the stage, one step at a time, his eyes fixed straight ahead. He could feel every single person in that room watching him. He could feel their doubt, their amusement, their certainty that he was about to fail. He climbed the stairs to the stage. The piano was waiting for him in the center, a big black grand piano with keys that gleamed under the stage lights. It was the nicest piano he had ever seen, nothing like the old one at the church, nothing like the one his mother used to play. Tobias walked over to it slowly. He pulled out the bench. He sat down. For a moment, he just stared at the keys. His hands were trembling so badly, he was not sure he could even lift them. The room was quiet now, but it was not a respectful quiet. It was a waiting quiet, a watching quiet, the kind of silence that comes right before something breaks. Tobias closed his eyes. He thought about his mother. He thought about the way she used to sit beside him, her hand on his shoulder, her voice soft and encouraging. He thought about all the nights at that little church, playing until his fingers hurt, pouring everything he had into the music. He thought about every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every moment he had felt invisible and worthless and alone. Then he opened his eyes, placed his fingers on the keys, and began to play. The first note came out soft, almost like a whisper. It floated through the auditorium and hung in the air for just a moment before fading away. A few people in the crowd shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. A girl in the 3rd row was still looking at her phone, waiting for something funny to happen so she could hit record. But then came the 2nd note, and the 3rd, and suddenly, something changed. The notes began to connect, weaving together into something bigger, something deeper. The melody rose and fell like waves on an ocean, each phrase building on the one before it. Tobias's fingers moved across the keys with a kind of grace that did not match the boy everyone thought they knew. This was not the kid who could barely get a sentence out without stumbling. This was not the kid in the old hoodie who sat alone and never looked anyone in the eye. This was someone else entirely. The piece he was playing was called Ballade No. 1-inch G minor. It was written by a composer named Chopin almost 200 years ago. And it is one of the most difficult piano pieces ever created. Professional musicians train for years just to attempt it. Some never master it at all. It requires speed, precision, emotion, and control all at once. One wrong note, one moment of hesitation, and the whole thing falls apart. But Tobias did not hesitate. Not once. His fingers flew across the keyboard like they had a mind of their own. The music poured out of him, filling every corner of the auditorium, wrapping around every person in that room, whether they wanted it to or not. It was impossible to ignore. It was impossible to look away. The girl who had been holding up her phone slowly lowered it. Her mouth was open, but no words came out. The boys who had been whispering jokes to each other went silent. Even the teachers, who had been standing near the back with their arms crossed, took a few steps closer to the stage. No one was laughing anymore. The music shifted. It grew darker, more intense. The notes came faster now, crashing into each other like thunder, building toward something massive and unstoppable. Tobias leaned into the piano, his whole body moving with the rhythm, his eyes half closed, completely lost in the sound. And then, just when it seemed like the music could not get any more powerful, it softened again. The storm faded. The thunder rolled away. And in its place came something gentle, something heartbreaking, a melody so beautiful and so sad that it felt like it was pulling something out of your chest. That was when people started to cry. It began with a girl in the front row. She did not even realize it at first. The tears just came, sliding down her cheeks while she sat frozen in her seat. Then another student. Then another. A teacher near the back pressed a hand to her mouth and looked away, trying to keep herself together. They did not know why they were crying. They did not know what this music meant or where it came from. But something about it reached inside them and touched a place they did not even know was there. Tobias played on. He was not in that auditorium anymore. Not really. In his mind, he was back in his old living room, sitting at the piano with his mother beside him. He could hear her voice, soft and warm, telling him to feel the music, not just play it. He could feel her hand on his shoulder, steadying him, believing in him. This was the piece she had promised to teach him one day. The piece she said he would be ready for when he was older. She never got the chance to show him. But Tobias had learned it anyway. He had found the sheet music online, printed it out, and spent nearly 2 years teaching himself every single note. Some nights at the church, he would play it over and over until his hands cramped and his eyes burned from exhaustion. He did it for her. All of it. Every late night. Every painful hour of practice. Every moment of doubt and fear and loneliness. It was all for her. And now, finally, he was playing it the way she would have wanted, the way she would have been proud of. The music began to build again, slowly at first, then faster. The notes climbed higher and higher, the tension growing with every measure. Tobias's hands were a blur now, moving so fast they barely seemed human. Sweat dripped down his forehead. His heart was pounding. But he did not stop. He could not stop. He was so close to the end, and then it came. The final passage. The climax of the entire piece. A cascade of notes so fast and so powerful that it felt like the whole room was shaking. Tobias threw everything he had into it, every ounce of pain and love and grief and hope that had been building inside him for years. The last chord rang out like a bell, and then there was silence. Complete, total silence. No one moved. No one breathed. The auditorium was frozen, like time itself had stopped. Tobias sat at the piano, his hands still resting on the keys, his chest heaving, his face wet with tears he had not even noticed falling. For a long moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched on, so thick you could almost touch it. And then, from somewhere in the back of the room, someone started clapping. It was slow at first, just one person. Then another joined in. Then another. And suddenly, the whole auditorium erupted. People were standing up. People were cheering. People were clapping so hard their hands hurt, and they did not care. Tobias looked up, blinking through his tears, and saw something he had never seen before. He saw people looking at him, really looking at him. Not with mockery, not with pity, but with something else. Something that looked a lot like respect. The applause went on and on. It did not stop. Students who had never spoken a kind word to him were on their feet. Teachers were wiping their eyes. Even the boys who had made fun of him for weeks were standing there with their mouths open, their phones forgotten in their pockets. No one knew what to say. No one had the words, because what they had just witnessed was not just a performance. It was not just some kid playing piano at a school talent show. It was something real, something raw, something that came from a place so deep and so honest that it left everyone in that room changed. Tobias stood up slowly. His legs were shaking, his whole body was trembling. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, he did not feel invisible. He felt seen. He walked off the stage in a daze, the applause still ringing in his ears. Students reached out to touch his shoulder as he passed. People said things to him, words he could not quite hear over the noise. A girl who had never even looked at him before grabbed his hand and squeezed it, her eyes still wet with tears. Tobias did not know how to react. He did not know what to do with all of this. For so long, he had been no one. A ghost. A shadow. And now, in the span of a few minutes, everything had changed. But there was still one more thing the world did not know. One more truth that had not yet been revealed. And when it came out, it would change the way everyone saw him all over again. The rest of that day passed in a blur. Tobias walked through the hallways like he was dreaming. People kept coming up to him. Some wanted to shake his hand. Some wanted to say sorry for the way they had treated him. Some just stared at him like they were seeing him for the very first time. And in a way, they were. For months, they had looked right through him. He had been invisible to them, nothing more than a quiet kid with a stutter and old clothes. They had judged him without ever bothering to know him. They had laughed at him without ever wondering what was going on inside his head or his heart. Now they knew. And they did not know how to handle it. Tobias went home that afternoon and did not tell anyone what had happened. His grandmother asked how his day was, and he just nodded and said it was fine. His younger brother wanted to play video games, and Tobias sat with him for a while, even though his mind was somewhere else entirely. He kept replaying the performance over and over in his head, the way the music had felt coming out of his fingers, the way the room had gone silent, the way people had looked at him when it was over. He had never experienced anything like it before. And he was not sure he ever would again. That night, he walked to the little church like he always did. The pastor was there, sweeping the floor near the entrance. He looked up when Tobias came in, and smiled. "Heard you had quite a day," the pastor said. Tobias stopped. "How did you know?" The pastor chuckled softly. "Word travels fast in a small town. One of the teachers at your school goes to this church. She called me this afternoon. Said she had never seen anything like it." Tobias did not know what to say. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, looking down at the floor. The pastor walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "Your mother would be proud of you, son. I hope you know that." Tobias felt his throat tighten. He nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. He went to the piano and sat down. But he did not play. Not right away. He just sat there in the quiet, letting everything sink in. The church was dark, except for a few candles flickering near the altar. The air smelled like old wood and dust. It was peaceful here. Safe. This little room had become his sanctuary over the past year. The one place where he could be himself, without fear. After a long time, he finally placed his hands on the keys. But instead of playing the Chopin piece, he played something simpler. A lullaby his mother used to sing to him when he was little. The melody was soft and sweet. And as he played, he felt the tears come again. But this time, they did not feel heavy. They felt like release. The next morning at school, everything was different. People who had never spoken to him before said hello in the hallways. Teachers smiled at him. Even the boys who had mocked him kept their distance, looking uncomfortable whenever he walked by. No one made fun of his stutter anymore. No one laughed at his clothes. It was like the whole school had collectively decided to see him as a human being for the first time. But the biggest surprise came during second period, when the principal's voice crackled over the loudspeaker and asked Tobias to come to the main office. His heart sank. He had no idea what this was about. Had he done something wrong? Was he in trouble? He walked to the office with his stomach in knots, expecting the worst. But when he got there, the principal was smiling. And she was not alone. His grandmother was sitting in one of the chairs, and next to her was a woman Tobias had never seen before. She was dressed in a nice suit and had a folder in her hands. "Tobias," the principal said, "this is Mrs. Whitmore. She's from the admissions office at Juilliard." Tobias blinked. He must have heard that wrong. Juilliard was one of the best music schools in the entire world. It was in New York City. People trained their whole lives just to audition there, and most of them never got in. The woman stood up and extended her hand. "It's wonderful to meet you, Tobias. I've heard a lot about you." He shook her hand, still too confused to speak. She smiled kindly. "I'm not sure if you remember, but you submitted an application and audition video to our school about 4 months ago. We were very impressed. In fact, we were so impressed that we offered you a full scholarship." The room went silent. Tobias felt like the ground had dropped out from under him. He had almost forgotten about that application. He had recorded the audition video on his phone late one night at the church, never really believing anything would come of it. He had not told anyone because he did not want to get his hopes up. He did not want to face the disappointment if they said no. But they had not said no. His grandmother let out a small gasp and covered her mouth with her hand. The principal was beaming, and Mrs. Whitmore just stood there, watching him with a warm expression. "We sent the acceptance letter to your home address a few weeks ago," she continued. "But when we didn't hear back, we decided to reach out directly. We wanted to make sure you knew." Tobias thought back to the past few weeks. The mail at his grandmother's apartment was always a mess. Bills and junk mail piled up on the kitchen counter, and sometimes things got lost. He had never seen any letter from Juilliard. He had no idea. He started, but the words got stuck. His stutter was back, but this time, no one rushed him. Everyone just waited. "I didn't know." He finally managed. I didn't think I would get in. I didn't think I would get in." Mrs. Whitmore smiled. "Well, you did. And we would love to have you. Your talent is extraordinary, Tobias. We don't see someone like you very often." His grandmother stood up and pulled him into a hug so tight he could barely breathe. She was crying and laughing at the same time, saying things he could not quite hear through her tears. The principal shook his hand and told him how proud the whole school was. And Mrs. Whitmore handed him the folder, which contained all the details about his scholarship and what to expect when he started classes in the fall. Tobias held that folder like it was made of gold. Later that day, word spread through the school. The quiet kid, the one everyone had laughed at, the one they had doubted and mocked and ignored. He was going to Juilliard, on a full scholarship, to study piano at one of the best music schools on the planet. People did not know how to react. Some were amazed. Some were ashamed of how they had treated him. And some just shook their heads in disbelief, wondering how they had missed it all along. But Tobias did not care what they thought anymore. He had spent so long trying to be invisible, trying to protect himself from the cruelty of others. And now, finally, he understood something important. The people who laugh at you do not define you. The people who doubt you do not know your story. And the silence you keep does not mean you have nothing to say. Sometimes, the quietest people carry the loudest gifts. You just have to give them a chance to be heard. And when you do, they might just leave you speechless.